Just beginning the first bracha of the supplications. Ato chonei lodam das. What is the meaning of the word chonein? Chanina, the meaning of chonein is you graciously endow man with das, with discretion. The word das also has a connotation of something on a divine level. For instance, we find by Bilam that he knew das elyon. He was able to have a certain understanding of God's mind, of God's involvement in existence. Something which goes beyond retention of fact, and something besides something which you could extrapolate, which we'll discuss in the moment what that is. That's called bina, extrapolation. Das is a sense of discretion. You have a sense of something. We speak about sage wisdom. What's sage wisdom? It's not knowledge. It's not just understanding a fact and you're able to extrapolate from that fact to apply it elsewhere, but it's a total composition of the totality of the person, because that person is able to integrate everything together. He has wisdom. That's what das is. Das is discretion, which is more than just knowledge and more than understanding of a fact, but it's discretion. It's very interesting. A person who's a stable person is referred to in Hebrew as a bar das. He has das. An unstable person is called a shota, as we mentioned. A person can have an IQ, superior IQ, but if he's not stable, he's not liable for his behavior, and he's considered incompetent. Das means you have the ability to have control, to take whatever you're endowed with and to actually see it in a rational context. A person who's unstable, we say he's irrational. We find that the Torah tells us regarding Paro that after the fifth plague, God took away his free choice. As it says, God hardened the heart of Paro. So Rambam asks that if factually he had no control over his decision process, why is he held accountable for his behavior? He no longer had control over his decision making. So on that, the Rambam says that initially he was exposed to a level of clarity which was one of a kind. And because he acted defiantly and arrogantly to God, God withdrew the gift of free choice. And therefore, he behaved irrationally. It was irrational, his behavior. He was stable, but a rational person, based on the facts and the way the God of the Jews responded to his behavior, he would have behaved differently. He behaved irrationally. Das is rational behavior. That's what it is. But it's very interesting. It's chanina. Ato chonein lodam das. This is God as being gracious. We say a person is exceptionally gracious. That God endows us with discretion. Now, you could teach somebody something. The term teaching over here doesn't say malamed, as we'll see in a moment. It says umalamed le'enosh bino, and he teaches to man insight, perception, the ability to understand something, to extrapolate from it, and take it to another level. That's bina. Chokhmah is knowledge. Bina is understanding the nuances of that knowledge, and you're able to extrapolate it and apply it to other situations because you have a full grasp of that knowledge. That's bina. Das It doesn't say melamed. God doesn't teach you das. God gives you das. That a person is rational. You have wisdom, that's an endowment. Understanding the text of the bracha is umelamed lenosh bina. He teaches man bina. You could teach a person a skill. But to be, as they say, to be the true artisan, to be the master of that can't be taught. Either you have it or you don't have it. I can teach you how to be a diamond cutter, how to paint, or whatever it may be, whatever field. But to be out of the ordinary in that field, that's a gift. That's an endowment. The person is gifted, and therefore he's what we call top of his game in whatever area that is. And it goes beyond IQ. It's an ability. You have an ability. You know, we speak about a savant. A savant is a person he has retardation, but in one area he surpasses genius. Clearly, it's not the intellect; it's a certain sense he's given that in a moment he's able to have insights. It's like almost like sensory. It's a sensory perception. A person with certain sensory perceptions, that person, that's a gift. That has nothing to do with intellect. Like people have six senses, a sixth sense. So when we speak about the blessing of wisdom, discretion, understanding, when we speak about das, it's an endowment. You graciously give das. You endow man with das. And you teach him bina. That could be taught, how to understand something. By giving you certain insights in understanding, you're able to apply it to other things. But discretion, that is an endowment. And therefore the word gracious is used. God graciously endows. But if you take a look, there's a different terminology. When we speak about discretion, it's odom. When we speak about teaching, insight, understanding, it's enosh. What's the difference between odom and enosh? We speak a person is a ben odom. He's a person. That's a person who's ready, someone who's developed, someone who has all the capacity to be able to process. When you've come to a certain level of development, then we talk about an endowment. You're endowed with something due to who you are. As we say, the ultimate Odom was Adam before the sin. What is Odom? Odom, as we discussed, he was called Adam because he was made from earth. And the Maharal of Prague explains, earth, what is the meaning of earth? Earth is potential. That within the human being lies a potential to be able to advance himself. Adam had the ability initially, before he ingested the evil of the tree of knowledge, he was unlimited. He had unlimited potential to be able to cleave to God at that special level. He radiated a holiness that the angels had mistaken his radiance for the radiance of Hashem. And they began singing praises to him. Once he ate of that tree of knowledge, the evil actually extinguished and stifled it and suppressed it, that it didn't exist any longer. The descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the patriarchs at Sinai, we assumed that capacity of what? Of Adam, of Adam before the sin. Atem kriyim Adam, hem lo kriyim Adam. We, the Jewish people, are classified as Adam. Adam doesn't mean the human being. They're human as we're human. Adam means within the context of capacity, that's the capacity we have. We have the capacity of Adam before the sin. As he was able to soar and develop an impact, advance something which is on an unlimited level, which borders on the infinite, that's what we have. That's what the Jewish people were able to evolve into at Sinai. We take it as Hashem's people. through the giving of the Torah. Ato chonen l'odom das. Who does he endow with das, with discretion? The odom. The odom is what? Is the completed person. The person ready, who has all the trappings of a human being. He's developed to a certain point. Now he's rational. He endows him with rational understanding, with wisdom, discretion. You have an ability to have discretion. And discretion on an unusual level, that's called wisdom. To advise a person. Umalamed lenosh bina. Enosh, as we showed from a verse in Tehillim, when Hashem wanted to give the Torah to the Klal Yisrael, the Malachim, the angel says, Ma enosh, kisis karena. The enosh, the undeveloped man, is not even worth mentioning. He's so fickle. He's so prone to fail. What relevance does this physical being have to this holy entity called the wisdom of God, which is the Torah? Ma enosh kisis kareno. Therefore, God's splendor should be kept in heaven. That's what the angel said to God. But they didn't understand that this Enosh, what they're calling Enosh, which is all mankind is Enosh, except for the Jewish people. Because we were able to ascend to the level of Adam before the sin at Sinai. This is not Enosh, although in the physical sense, we're identical to every other human being in terms of our physical makeup, but in terms of what the essence of the person is, which is the soul, that makes the difference. We are Odom. So we speak about Ato Chonei L'Odom Das, Umalamed L'Enosh Bina, and he teaches the unformed man insight. That's teaching. I could teach you that. One is an endowment, one is teaching. Chonenu mi'itcho. Chochma binu v'doas. We've received graciously from you. Again, the words chonenu. Graciously received mi'itcho from you. Chochma. That's knowledge. Bina. Understanding of that knowledge. That's insight. To be able to extrapolate and apply to other situations. V'doas. And discretion. Ultimately, everything is God's graciousness. But we made a discernment between das is purely an endowment, the other is taught. You teach. But that I'm agreeable to teach you, that's because I'm great, because God is gracious. I'll give you an example. A person is one of a level diamond cutter. And he has a certain technique, which is really his secret technique. And he would not share it with anyone. But if he shares that technique with you, you become the most sought after diamond cutter. Because your end product is at a level which nothing's comparable to that end product. And he's willing to teach it to you. That he chose you to teach you, why is that? That's due to his graciousness. It's a technique which is taught, but he's being gracious that he's sharing his secret technique with you, although the process to understand it is being taught. It's not a sense, you're being taught. And if you know the technique, then you become that expert. You become advanced in your area, in your field of whatever the field may be. So as I said, the opening of the bracha is you endow man with discretion. Discretion is an endowment. You can't be taught that. Either you have it or you don't. And he teaches man being an understanding, to be able to understand the knowledge which he's taught. But ultimately, whether it's chokhmah, whether it's knowledge, whether it's understanding or discretion, everything's an endowment. God graciously gives it to you. He teaches it to you. Not as endowment, but he teaches. It's a process. when you say this bracha, what are you supposed to think? You find people who are not genius necessarily, and they come upon certain things which are called discoveries. Of course, you can't come upon a discovery in medicine unless you have a background in medicine. In pharmacology, pharmacy, you can't unless you have some knowledge as a pharmacist to know the compounds, the chemical compounds. So if you have the background, you're able to not necessarily due to your research, but many times you come upon things. We stumble upon things. Very often you have a person, scientist, was working in a lab for years, and he falls asleep, and his head hits the test tube, and the chemical spills and mixes, and all of a sudden he wakes up, and there's the future of humanity. How did it happen? Because his head, when he nodded, it hit something, and that was the end result. That's the future. Penicillin. How did it happen? During World War I, the soldiers, the bread became moldy, and they could only eat moldy bread. That mold, that decomposition of the bread produced this, whatever it is, and that was called penicillin. They scraped it, and all of a sudden they saw the soldiers ate it. They were resilient to certain things, or they covered for certain things. How did it come about? It's a discovery, but you have to notice it. You notice things. So even the ordinary person, if he's given the gift that he notices things other people don't notice, then he's able to bring about certain things. But that's not discretion. That's a gift. The whole concept, I always say, of the zipper. Until probably the 20s, most people, the way they would close the clothing was with buttons or pins. The zipper was a discovery, phenomenal discovery, the zipper. And once it was presented, the concept, everybody could duplicate that concept, but you had to think about it. There was a lawsuit. There's a person, maybe this was 20 years ago, this person, in terms of the windshield wipers, at one time, windshield wipers, they were on or off. Then afterwards, somebody discovered a way that it should go based on, you could set every few moments, the wiper would wipe the window. And then one of the car companies went and they took his patent without permission. And they manufactured millions of cars or hundreds of thousands of cars. It was a major lawsuit. I mean, ultimately they had to pay the man for it's not such a big genius. But it never happened. Either was on or off. You're able to modulate how often the wiper wipes that window. Genius. It's not genius, but you have to think about it. So that being able to think about something, that's an endowment. That's a gift. God shows you certain things. But all this is all grace, God's graciousness. We had discussed that the world continuously advances itself. Technology-wise, scientifically-wise, new discoveries continuous. And at one time, as I mentioned the other day, a person would be preoccupied just maintaining his existence 40 hours a week. A homekeeper, a mother, a wife. Years ago, when you fill out a form, they would say occupation, and the woman would write housewife. Could you imagine what women writing housewife today? It's a disgrace. You say that you get the stimulus check, and you're able to travel on the cruises and this and that. That's sophisticated. But to say that you're a housewife, something you're like some kind of primitive person. You don't put housewife on the form. But at one time, a wife had no choice but to be the housewife, to maintain the house. You had a scrub pan. You had to beat the carpet. All these modern innovations didn't exist. All of a sudden, there were new insights. Washing machine, vacuum cleaner, fan, this, that, whatever it was. Materials, fibers, fabric, detergents, all this. What's it all about? How did they come upon all that? Now we have all this time in the world. We don't have to be distracted. God, evidently, it's a choice. With all this time on your hand, what do you do with that new time? It's easy to focus, but it's based on choice. Of course, you can get distracted with other things. You have people, they work a whole lifetime earning, and they succeed, and they have a tremendous retirement package. They retire. What do? They have to figure out what they can do with their lives. Thank God at the age of 65, they're healthy, but they forced retirement, and they have to take their retirement. How many times could you travel around the world? You've cluttered up your house with all your souvenirs and antiques that you bought. Now, what do? Join a country club. You sit. How long could you eat in the country club? And how long could you be on the golf green? And what of this? You have so much time to think. God gives a person time to think. At one time, people didn't have time to think. You were too preoccupied just maintaining your existence. So all this is a gift. That we have time, that's a gift. What do you do with the time? I once told a story. This Jew visited the Chofetz Chaim in the early part of the 20th century. Successful Jew, observant Jew. And he comes to the Chofetz Chaim, and he's amazed at this paltry type of setting of his home. He has a few books on the bookshelf, and it's not something that impressive. And the Chofetz Chaim looks at his books and he groans. And the man says to the Chofetz Chaim, "Why are you groaning?" He says, those books cost money, and money is time. He says, in the United States, they make a mistake. They say time is money. He says, no, the opposite. When you have money, you have time. If you have no choice, you're preoccupied, you're earning a living. You're distracted. You have no time to invest it in what it should be invested in. Of course, you have no choice. But if you have money, then you have time. God provided us with plenty of time. You earn enough that you can maintain yourself. You have enough off hours that you're not working, you have time. But it's a struggle. What's the struggle? You have other things you could be occupied. At one time, people didn't have internet. People didn't have cell phones. So you couldn't be busy on the phone 24 hours a day. Now, wherever you are, there was an article, somebody was in the Himalayas. He climbed the Mount Everest. And this person, his dream was to climb Mount Everest. And he was with these guides. And he realized, and he had 2 small children and a wife. And the article was written, spoke about what kind of hero this man was. Why was he a hero? Because there was a question, if he would come down at a certain point of the ascent, he would live. And he'd be able to go back to his family. But because it was live stream, he passed that point, and once he got to the top, he's not coming back. Because he's going to die. And he called his children from top of the Mount Everest with the phone. He had a certain kind of phone that he was able to communicate. And he said goodbye to his wife and children to show them how much he loved them. And then he dies. That's a hero. You understand? To me, that's the ultimate level of cruelty. You're willing to give up your family, not raise your children for the sake of your dream to make the summit of Mount Everest. You understand? But the way society processes this is heroic. Heroic. He was willing to sacrifice his children and his wife for the sake of his dream to reach the summit of Mount Everest. You understand what kind of what the models and the heroes of our society are? This is rational thinking. But God says, the way you make your bed, that's the way you sleep. I give you all the means and all the tools. Let's see what you do with it. Person has a paintbrush, he has the paint, he has the canvas, everything. We'll see what, and you're able to paint. Let's see what kind of picture you're going to paint. You know, the Midrash says, when a child is born, everybody's excited and happy. New child was born. But King Solomon, the wise man who ever lived, says the opposite. I envy the dead, I don't envy the living. And the Midrash says, what is it analogous to? In the olden days, or even recently, when you have a new ship, when you launch a ship, what do? It's called christening the ship. They take the ship, and they have bands, and they have speeches, and they have a bottle of champagne, and they break it on the hull of the ship, and the ship goes out to sea. Everybody's excited. But the question is it coming back? There's always a question, is it coming back? You launch the ship, excitement, joy, ecstasy. You're launching the ship. But a few months pass, they realize the ship went down at sea. When a person's born, the Midrash says, everybody's excited. A new child's born. But factually, the various storms that this child is going to have to deal with in his life, and the challenges, what's this ship going to look like at the end of 80, 90 years? Therefore, King Solomon says, I envy the dead, I don't envy the living. When a person's born, it's all potential. You don't know where he's going. But when a person dies, that he dies, and you see that he really invested his life properly, productively, with great value. He says, because at the end of life, then we know exactly what the person achieved. Beginning of life, you have no idea. The many challenges, you don't know what direction the winds are blowing. You know, you're blown off course. As much as you could be best captain in the world, you're blown off course. You know, it's very interesting. Christopher Columbus, discovered America. How did he discover America? He was blown off course. And that's when he arrived in the United States. He saw this primitive tribe. He thought they were Indians. Called them Indians. He was going to India. He wasn't meant to come to the Northern Hemisphere, but he was blown off course. So who makes the determination where you end up? It's wide open. The question is how you deal with all those challenges. That's what it's all about. God endows man with wisdom. Wisdom is not a simple thing. That's a gift. He teaches man insight, perception, knowledge, but everything's an endowment because he does not teach you anything. That a person has a level of curiosity. You know, we say, what's an analyst? What's a good analyst? That you take all the variables into account and then you make an evaluation and you have questions. If the question is a valid question, the question will lead you to the answer. If you have an ability. But if you ask the wrong question, regardless how smart you are, as they say in English, you're barking up the wrong tree. The end result is you're not going to arrive where you should be arriving. If you took all the variables into account and the question, that means the question is a valid question. That question will lead you to understand the total composite or all the variables, what they present. But if you miss a point and therefore your analysis is faulty, your conclusions can be faulty. It was years ago, there was a student in the yeshiva, he was an only child. His mother was a principal of a school. His father was one of the top maritime lawyers in the United States. And they lived in New Orleans. Went to the day school in New Orleans. Simple Judaism, very basic level of Judaism. His father would spend the whole week in Washington, D.C. because that's where his maritime firm was. And this young boy was a genius. He was a genius kid. Went through the high school, went to the yeshiva. He learned well, went to Hopkins. Eventually, he had a PhD in genetics, and he worked for the NIH. And he was a genius. The government already had invested in research, maybe about 80 to $100 million in something. And they had people from the Indians working on this. They have quite a few Indians working in this. They were working on this for 2 years. The government spent a fortune. He was there for a week, and he pointed out that they missed the point. And therefore, all their evaluations, all their testing was faulty. It was worth nothing. Okay, 80 million, $100 million out the window, it's out the window. But again, you don't make the analysis correctly. The questions that you're pursuing and the conclusions you come to are faulty because the basis for those conclusions don't exist because they're not a real basis. It's not a real reality because you missed it. Person walks into a theater and they created a lighting system. You think you're 12 noon, high noon, and all of a sudden the lights go out. Then you realize, it's not the sun. It's all artificial light. So it's irrelevant what you think or what you believe. Are you gifted that you be able to come upon the truth of reality? That's an endowment. And wisdom is the ultimate endowment because that's not something which you could come upon yourself, that endowment. You have to be given that endowment because you have a purpose. I always say that, when I was raised by my mother and father, blessed memory, my mother especially would always tell me, if you put your mind to it, there's nothing you can't do. And there's nothing you can't understand. That's what she always taught me. But again, of course, person has limitation. But it's a perspective that if you apply yourself sufficiently, if it's within your capacity, you'll come upon it. There's certain things which are beyond your capacity. But in reality, that's within human terms. But there's nothing beyond God's ability. A person, God forbid, has an illness. The doctor says to the family, it's beyond our ability to deal with this illness or whatever it is. You have to pray to God. The doctor says this. You got to pray to God. If God wants to help you, there's a chance. Otherwise, there's no chance. Within the context of understanding, although we're born with a certain limitation, they call it intelligence quotient, up to a point. Firstly, we say that a human being only uses a third of his brain power. 2/3 not even used and not developed. Do we know what we have? Do we not know what we have? As we say, only God. But even if it's not, it doesn't make a difference. We speak about prophecy. Prophecy, when a prophet prophesizes, he prophesizes in a sleep state. A prophet does not prophesize with his human faculties, with his brain. It's directly the soul. The connection is to the soul. The soul is not finite. The soul is a spiritual entity. And therefore, when God communicates with the soul, the infusion of information, what's communicated, what may take 100 years to study and to accomplish and to amass, you're able to amass in one moment. In one moment. Because the concept of limitation has no relevance. Because when God is communicating with the soul, it's within the context of unlimited. So the information is unlimited. The capacity is unlimited. That's what happens. And therefore it says, David HaMelech, King David, was able to understand in Torah would have taken another person 100 years to study. Because God gave him those insights and those illuminations, elucidated things for him, that he was able to come on to certain realities, which humanly were not possible. When you pray to God and you say, you endow man with wisdom, You teach him understanding. Person says, you know why? This person is one of the top physicists because he was mentored under Einstein at Princeton. And therefore, he was Einstein's protege. Therefore, he is Einstein's successor, Lahavdil, Elav Avdolos. And if God's your mentor and you're God's protege and you pray to God and he wants to expand your capacity on every level, nothing's beyond God's ability. You know, I just had this conversation yesterday. One time, for a person to succeed financially in life, it took a lifetime. A person would have to build a business, and if either he would succeed or not succeed. Today, you could have a person, 2 years ago, he didn't have two nickels to rub together. 2 years later, he's worth $1 billion. Billion. And the man doesn't have a superior IQ. He came upon something. You're going to tell me it's genius. It's gift of God. The man couldn't get a job to sweep a floor or to be a stock boy at best. And all of a sudden now everybody is bowing to him and prostrating himself and singing his praises. You know why? Because he made it big. He's the new rainmaker. What's his background? What's his capacity? Well, he came up with an idea. He met a person, Clearly it's a gift of God. It can't be understood any differently. But everybody says, no, he's the guy. He's the guy. He's the one. And his ego continuously inflates because he believes he's the guy. He has something somebody doesn't have. He may have the money. But enter into an intelligent conversation with this person. We'll see what he has to offer you, other than tell you about his product. Or maybe how to market his product. Because he was advised, he paid $10,000 an hour to hire a firm to tell him how to market the product. So all of a sudden now he's the genius on the block. It's clear. God wanted him to become wealthy. That's the answer. There's no other answer. It's a gift. We're born naturally with a certain capacity of intelligence. We are. But doesn't mean to say, of course, there's no question you have to develop it. The Chofetz Chaim says that the mind is like fertile earth. You leave it fallow, nothing happens. You engage with it, and you plant it, and you cultivate it, the mind is phenomenal. There's no end to what the mind is able to produce as that fertile earth produces. But it's up to a point. But a person really is given it his all best. Still, if you have faith in God and understand that God is your endower and he's gifting you, and you want to understand something and have an ability, it's up to God. But he could expand it. It's irrelevant what other people say. How did he come upon this? He's a lucky guy. It's irrelevant. But there's such a thing as expansion. Because there's nothing beyond God's ability, although it's not a revealed miracle, but within concealed, the many concealed miracles which happen, which you're not even aware, that's out of the realm of nature. It's only, we don't notice it, but factually it's a miracle. And this goes into when we give the thanks at the end of the Amidah, we say, Al Nisecha Shebchol Yom Imanu, the miracles which are every day with us, Al Niflosecha, and the wonders which we experience every day. There are many wonders we experience, we don't realize they're wonders. But really, what should have been, it shouldn't be what you have. It's beyond that. And God provided it. And you don't even realize it's out of the ordinary that you have it. Because some people make it, some people don't make it. So when you say this bracha and you really believe that everything you have is purely an endowment, it's God's graciousness. God could be gracious at an unlimited level. And you want it for good reasons. You want to study Torah. You want to have a better understanding of who God is. You want to do things to bring God's glory to a greater level. That's the drive. That's the impetus. And God hears well. If you're worthy, he may provide you with it. There's an expression, and it happens. They're called late bloomers. Children, up to a certain age, they were seen as ordinary. At a certain age, they reach a certain level of adolescence, they take off like a rocket. They used to call those kids late bloomers. And they were late bloomers. They had to, like people develop motor skills later, earlier, later. Certain children are precocious. You have different kinds of children. But you have people, even when the late bloomer is really late. Person was never exposed to a certain type of environment. Then he's mentored by a certain type of Rebbe, a teacher in Torah. And the man becomes something out of the ordinary. And the person made sacrifices to come there. Years ago, there were people, studying Torah wasn't the in thing. Right after World War II, even observant families, observance was a different level of observance then than today because the parents weren't as learned as they are today, a person who has a Torah education. But because of the war and because of the Holocaust, what did parents want for their children? To be able to earn a respectable livelihood. And therefore, at one time, a high school education was enough. Today, parents wanted a college education, become an accountant, become a lawyer, and that was the pride of the parent. But if a person says, I only want to study Torah, because you couldn't do both, parents were opposed to it, even observant parents. But their interest was the best interest of the child, because they didn't have that full appreciation, understand its value. But certain people, they went and they bucked the system, and they invested their lives, and they made sacrifices. And financially, they were cut off from their families, because they weren't willing to follow what the parents wanted. Literally cut off. And they made great sacrifices. And those people who made those sacrifices, many of them succeeded phenomenally in that area of Torah. I'm not sure if they would have been the genius lawyer. Who was it, Clarence Darrow? It wouldn't have been that type of lawyer. They would have been mediocre. But as Talmidei Chachamim, as people involved in studying Torah, because since they made sacrifices, when you sacrifice for God, then limitations is not relevant. Not relevant. I was once with Rabbi Pinto with a certain person is a phenomenally wealthy person. And this person is written up in the Forbes. And Rabbi Pinto said to him, he says, you know why you merited the type of wealth you have? And the man's an observant man. He says, because a generation or two or three back, you had a grandfather who lived in Salonika, and he gave his life to sanctify God's name. So in his merit, you were given all this wealth out of the ordinary to be able to do great things with it. I'm just telling you, that's what he shared with him. Now, you could be smart, you could be this, you could be that, but certain things are gifts of God. Not everybody has that gift or that privilege to be endowed. But if a person makes sacrifices and you really want it sincerely for the right reason, you never know how God will respond. Now, there's a famous story not too long ago, maybe 20 years ago. There was an IDF soldier. He was 18, 19 years old. His name was Nachshon Waxman. And he was taken captive by the PLO. His parents lived in a certain neighborhood in Yerushalayim. They originally were Americans. And the woman's had a child who had Down syndrome. One child, her youngest child. So the parents didn't have the easy life. And he was taken captive, kidnapped. And the Israeli government left no stone unturned to be able to take him out of captivity. The whole world, out of the ordinary, prayed for his return, to return alive. And they prayed and they prayed. And finally, the commandos went, they broke down the door, they killed the terrorists, and they found this 19-year-old young man. They tortured him to death. He was dead. So there was a secular correspondent who interviewed the mother, who was an observant woman. And she says, you people believe in God. You believe when you pray, God hears. Here you had the whole Orthodox world praying for the return of your son. He was returned safely. But he died. See, it doesn't work. She says, no. You could pray to God, but sometimes the answer is no. That's what she answered the correspondent. Just because we want things and we want it to be a certain way, maybe God disagrees. God has another program. That's not the program. Just because we think that should be the program. So she said to the person, I accept God's answer was no. Since no was no, therefore my son was not found alive. That's what she said to this person. We believe in tefillah. We believe in prayer. And you could have the best intention. You want to sanctify God's name. If God provides, you be the greatest servant of God. But you know something? We don't know what tomorrow's supposed to bring. We don't know God's plan. But we know one thing, that we have to have a certain mindset and a certain perspective. Why do we exist? So a person prays to God and he acknowledges, God, you endow man with discretion, with wisdom. You teach it, the unformed man, insight, understanding. But every level of understanding, whether it's discretion, knowledge, or understanding, it's all endowment. And you pray for the right reason. Why do you want that wisdom? To do the deal? To be the card shark? That when you go to the casino, you walk away with a full pocket of money? Is that why you're going? Or you have some altruistic reason, especially if it's infused with God's glory? That's what you wanted. So the closer you are to that, the better chance you have that God should answer you. And even if he doesn't answer you what you want, but you want to know something, you still get credit for it. Baruch atah Hashem chonen. We explain what is Baruch atah Hashem. We acknowledge Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is the appellation for God being infinite, and the attribute of mercy, which everything emanates from him. You are the source of all blessing. And what is that? Chonen ados. You endow man with wisdom. You are the endower. We recognize it without a question. I once told over a story to this, maybe we studied Chofetz Chaim then, and when right before they opened the tunnel tours by the Kosel, they did all the archaeological digs, and they dug to the bottom of the Western Wall, and they uncovered tremendous things there. And it was Tisha B'Av night. It was myself, it was Rabbi Pinto, it was the one who did the digs. He's still there, lives in Israel, he's an Israeli. And it was Ira Rennert, it was Jay Schottenstein, and Jay Schottenstein's brother-in-law, who lived in Philadelphia. And it was about 12:30 at night. We're about to go into the tunnel tours. So his brother-in-law was not an observant Jew. I'm not sure if he's observant today. And he says to me, Rabbi, and he was very successful in the insurance industry. He created a certain system to cover all the needs, built a big business. And he says to me, I've attempted to understand the religion, orthodoxy, the Torah, this and that. And for some reason, I don't get it. And he says, and I'm a pretty smart guy. Those are his words. I'm a pretty smart guy. I said, okay. He says, you realize I have an MBA from Wharton. I'm a pretty smart guy. And yet, I don't get it. Doesn't resonate with me. Why doesn't it resonate with me? I'm a pretty smart guy. I said, we're going into the tours in 2 minutes. I really don't have enough time to answer you, even though you're a smart guy. But I want to ask you a question. Maybe the question itself will open your eyes to come to the answer. I said, you ever hear of Rambam, Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon? Which is, of course, great physician, philosopher, scientist, astrologer, this and that. I said, yes. But I said, do you know what his claim to fame was? He was a religious, observant Jew. And he got it. And he was also a pretty smart guy. So if Maimonides was able to get it, and you being a smart guy, why could he get it and you don't get it? That's my question to you. I said, maybe think about it. And then we went began the tour. You understand? You could have intelligence, but to come upon truth with that intelligence, the question is, what's driving you? What's the impetus? Why you want to advance your understanding? If a person truly, sincerely wants to come upon truth, when it comes to your own spirituality, which is the objective and the value of your existence, God will provide that for you. Because if God doesn't, then you don't stand the chance. But you have to meet certain criteria. Of course, certain people have greater challenges than others. Some people have to sacrifice to a greater degree to come upon certain truths, whatever, but only God knows that. But one key element in the equation is the intent has to be a proper intent, has to be altruistic intent. Why do I want to be the smartest guy? Why do I want to understand? What's the impetus? What's driving me? Why do I want to have that wisdom? You are the endower of wisdom. Graciously give it to me. What do you want it? To be able what? To do the deal, to build yourself another 16 rooms on your house. 3-car garage, you want a 6-car garage. No, but I want to do philanthropy. I'm going to build a ward in the hospital that all AIDS patients, they'll be able to be taken care of. Or give money to a medical school, to the March of Dimes. We're not saying giving to the March of Dimes is not something which is appropriate. But if a person has a choice, and a person is a Jew, where should his philanthropy go? Or I'll use a better term. Where should his tzedakah go? What are the causes he should support? What are the prime? We're not saying he should have something there also. But what are his primary causes that he should undertake when he's gifted with this ability to make a difference? On that, we don't say only God knows. There's a famous word from Reb Chanan Wasserman. We find that Avraham Avinu introduced monotheism to the world. He was the founding patriarch of the Jewish people. He was the personification of loving kindness. Yitzchak, the son of Avram, the miracle child, born to Avram when he was 100 years old, personifies sacrifice, exactness, the Akedah. Yaakov is the man who is the man of the tent, committed to the study of Torah. He represents the attribute of mercy due to the Torah that he had. We find a story. Yaakov, as he was coming back after being away from Beersheba for 34 years, on his way back, he encounters an angel, and there's a fierce battle. The Torah is very descriptive of this battle. And they fight and wrestle all night, and this angel is out to kill Yaakov. And finally, he's not able to be the victor, but he wounds him. He injures him. Hip injury. But ultimately, Yaakov was the victor. And Yaakov, because of that victory, went from Yaakov to Yisrael. That's the story. So Reb Chanan wants to ask the question. Until Avram, the world was in darkness, pagan, only paganism. There wasn't not a inkling of light in the world that there's such a thing as a monotheistic being. Avram introduces it. There's a God. He turned the world on its head. Avram was the Ivri. He took on the world single-handedly. Don't you think the angel should have attacked Avram? Why did the angel attack Yaakov? Seemingly, Avram, what he introduced to the world, the Satan should have been more opposed to that than what Yaakov had done. But yet, Avram was not attacked by the angel. The angel didn't try to kill Avram. Yitzchak, the ultimate model of sacrifice, which silenced the prosecution for against the Jewish people forever because of the sacrifice of the Akedah. Yitzchak was never attacked by an angel to kill him. Yaakov, the man of the tent, he himself is put in a position that if he wouldn't have been at the level he was, he would have been killed. Why? So he said like this, Jews always, give them example of the United States. All orphanages, there were Jewish orphanages. Jews built orphanages. Jews built synagogues. What is orphanages? Jews built hospital. Mount Sinai Hospital, built by Jews. Beth Israel Hospital, built by Jews. Montefiore, built by Jews. All hospitals built by Jews. You know something? It's just a question of time. If those families are not secured by Torah, they go to the dustbins of Judaism, God forbid. They cannot survive. The Jewish people cannot survive on chesed, on orphanages and hospitals, and soup kitchens. Can't survive on that. What about synagogues? Avoda. Yitzchak's Avoda. You have he had all the great cantors of Europe coming, and people will come from the stores, from work on Shabbos to go listen to the cantor. What happened to these people? That Judaism. Just a question of time. They deluded themselves by enjoying the cantorial rendition by the Chazan who came from Europe, and it was over. Why did we have 3 lost generations in the United States? Because there was no Torah education. There was no Jewish education. So the 3 lost generations. The children, they became secularized. At best, they were slightly traditional. Many of them assimilated. Yaakov comes on the scene. Torah. Torah is the antidote to that power. That incapacitates that power. Now we're talking about the real thing. This is a world struggle already. This is the battle between good and evil. Yaakov representing the ultimate power, therefore he's attacked. He's attacked. So therefore, if a person makes the sacrifice for what is the power, and you give it the secret code, and you want that secret code, which only the president's valet carries, that little satchel, that little briefcase. But that code, every Jew has the ability to possess that code. And you pray to God, you want it because that's the key for your survival. Because otherwise we're compromised. Give me insight, give me wisdom, give me discretion. And that is the emphasis and the thrust of your request and your supplication. God may give it to you, may not. But you have a pretty good chance that he will, because that's exactly what he wants. If you ask the king to glorify his name, and you're truly sincere in what your supplication is, to what degree will he? Only God knows. But again, the acknowledgement, even for other reasons, has value. But especially if the impetus for that request is, I want to have greater understanding, to understand your Torah, to appreciate your mitzvah, to understand my spirituality. What is the makeup of my soul and this composite of physical, spiritual, and how to maximize on that. It's a whole different reality. There's this book that came out on Paul Reichman, just a few months ago. It's worthwhile to read. Man being the wealthiest Jew in the world, and what his focus was, and what he's preoccupied with. It's not to be believed. A man who builds Battery Park. He builds Canary Wharf. He has entry in every echelon of society because of his ability and his success and his understanding. And he was a genius in business. And he was a great Talmud Chacham. Tremendous. And his heart and the focus was what? Primary God's glory. And he put his money where his mouth was. It's not only he talked the talk, he walked the walk. And he gave what he should give. So if a person like that goes, or a semblance of that goes, and you want for the good reason, for the right reason, coupled with the request as the men of the High Assembly have constructed this blessing, then we have a very good chance that even though we have a limited capacity, that capacity could expand, not even knowing that it was expanded. I'm going to stop here.